for a reasonable level of service would be about $700,000 if you contracted with the sheriff's office, or about $900,000 if you contracted with IPD. So those are just kind of spitball options, things that people could consider. So for those of you in the room, and I know a lot of you were from the city of Ithaca, we just want to put this question out there because we're going to be doing this presentation on the road in the town of Ithaca later, and then actually in Dryden. If you receive the same or better service from law enforcement at similar costs, would you be supportive of contracting for the service?
And like the previous slide, you mean contracting within the county?
Yes. Yeah.
You mean instead of the current?
Instead of the current. So this would be a replacement. So just for instance, the village of Cayuga Heights were to contract, if you're a resident there and you're saying, okay, if I'm going to get the same service if the village contracts with the sheriff's office, would I be in favor of it or not?
Are you going to ask why on the next slide?
Kind of.
Are we ready? Are we ready for that?
Ready for the next slide? Those who wanted to reply to this have? Okay. So our next slide is, what is your biggest concern about contracting? So would you want, whether you said yes or no, I'm sure you have concerns about it. So the community connections, that's an important one. One of the things that we would suggest in a contract is that you pick the same cohort of officers that work in that village on a regular basis. So with a vacation or something like that, you might have a sub, but you'd have the same group of, say, 6 officers that are working at that village routinely. So they do become familiar with it. That's how they're often constructed when you have this type of service. And this isn't unusual. For instance, the village of Mount Kisco in Westchester County just started this contract with the Westchester County Sheriff's Office, or Westchester County Police Department in the start of 2017. So they do that there. There are a couple of other instances in Western New York. Trying to remember, it's a suburb of Buffalo where the village contracts and does it for the town. I think it's very important for, if you're going to be paying for a service, that you want to have the control, make sure you're getting the service that you want. In the interest of making sure we honor everyone's time, we keep this to about an hour and a half. I'm going to ask you, you type in pretty quickly. About another 30 seconds, and then we'll move on. So yeah, what if the town refuses to pay? Well, if you're not paying for the service, they're not going to do it. That last one's interesting. These man-made lines, people cross them very easily today. When you think about when the municipal borders were drawn up, people were horse and buggy or foot only. And today it is very easy to get from one end of this county to the other, and you cross from one community to the next without even realizing it. Okay. So the next option wanted to talk about is the beginning of when we talk about creating big agencies here. So in this case, the county outside the city agencies merge. This is essentially the sheriff's office absorbing these other law enforcement agencies, either one at a time or all at once. And that could be Dryden, Groton, Hugo Heights. Trumansburg didn't participate in the study, but there's no reason they wouldn't be welcome to participate in this. So they transition into sheriff's office operations. You would maintain village sections or precincts, whatever you wanted to call them, where you continue to have operations in the village, where people show up to work and work out of a village station every day. They have that familiarity. You'd have the same cohort of people working that community on a regular basis. We would want every officer that's working today to keep their positions. I think that's important as we talk about transitioning, at least in the immediate term. If we talk about staffing changes, it would all be through attrition. We wouldn't be suggesting that we're going to be laying off large numbers of people as we transition, even if we needed to lay them off, and I'm not sure we do. Local municipalities support service through reduced share of sales tax or contract agreement. So we look at the sales tax in Tompkins County, find something a little interesting. And that is for the communities that are providing law enforcement. The share of the sales tax they get from the county is in the same ballpark as the amount of money they're paying for their law enforcement. It's not precise, and we detail it in the options report. And it's not as easy as the consultant saying make it so. There'd have to be some statutory changes to reallocate that money, but the county could hold back that money and then provide the service in lieu of, and be able to make that work so we're not seeing a big increase to the county residents who are outside the village and not receiving this service. So as the county begins to provide this service, there'd be ways to soften the blow so county outside village residents would not be paying for a service they're not receiving. So Hugo Heights, again, could do this for less than they're currently paying. And Dryden and Groton would have higher costs for the same number of FTEs. But if they're able to provide the service with fewer FTEs, their costs might come down and be equal to what they're doing today. And that would take a little bit more of an analysis to make sure that they're getting that same level of service that they want, they feel they need, and that, you know, where it comes in cost basis. So that's our first big agency option. And the next one is really talking about all agencies coming together into under one umbrella. So all public law enforcement officers, LEOs, working for a single agency, either a county police department, and this is done in 3 counties in New York State. Notice they all happen to be down near New York City and pretty big. They are not the sole providers in any one of those counties, but they are the largest provider in each of those counties. I take that back. Westchester, they're not the largest provider, but Nassau and Suffolk, they are. It would be a new agency. It would have a sole focus on law enforcement, road patrol. The sheriff, right now, would remain. It's a constitutional position, be elected, but their responsibilities would be dramatically reduced to just corrections and serving civil papers. So that would be a big transition here, and that's really, there's 2 different flavors of this single agency. The one with a county police department, and then the other one is transitioning or expanding the current sheriff's office, which is down below, expand to cover all municipalities. Services tailored based on expectations and service demands. So we're doing this, we want to make sure we're providing that same service you're getting today, but realize that not everyone's getting that same service today. So in a community that is getting that higher level of service, are they going to be willing to compensate to make sure that they're able to get that higher level going forward? So the implementation for any of these 3 options where we're creating that one large agency could be where there's a switch over all at once, or where you do a slow motion transition and you do it over time. So as attrition of officers, it gets replaced. So when a Hugo Heights officer retires, their position gets filled with a sheriff's deputy, which is a lower price point. And that sheriff's deputy shows up to work in Cuba Heights and works side by side with the Cuba Heights officers. And this is where it gets fun, is where do they fall into their chain of command? We gotta have some real planning as we go into that. But that is an option to be able to make this transition over time so you're not moving one or the other from one day to the next. And I was using Cuba Heights as an example. It could work with each one of these agencies, Ithaca, Dryden, Groton, Trumansburg, even though they didn't come to the table for this study. So let's talk about what would happen if, and this is a big if all expenses were funded through property taxes. And that's not the case today, but we wanted it to show this scenario because this is kind of a worst case for property taxes. But I wanted it to put it out there as part of the discussion. The cost certainly shifts. So we have potential changes to property tax of a single agency. So existing rate today, 2017, county is $660, Cuba Heights, $649, Dryden, Groton, City of Ithaca, they all go up. Now, for these three, Cuba Heights, Dryden, and Groton, they also pay a town tax. So their tax is a little bit closer to the City of Ithaca than I show on this chart, but that town tax doesn't get impacted by what happens to law enforcement. Everyone else in the town is paying that as well. So the potential rate, so if we took all their law enforcement expense, all the law enforcement expenses in the county, we added the new ones to the county budget, the potential rate rounded, so the county would go up by about 25%, 28%.
Why?
Why is that? So we're taking all of these expenses for Cuba Heights, Dryden, Groton, and they're all, and the city, and they're all falling under the sheriff's, all funding under the county budget.
Oh.
So the county is running the one and only public law enforcement agency in the county. Whether it's a sheriff's office, whether it's a county police department, they're running the big deal. And this model is just taking all the costs in 2017 and bringing it over. This model is taking the FTE of 125 officers and bringing it over at the sheriff's office expense. So what's our change? County goes up, your county tax goes up by 28%, and this is what would happen in the villages. It would drop. Villages in the city would drop. Now that includes, this drop includes the fact that your county tax is going up by 28%, your village tax is dropping, and this is your net change. So in Cuba Heights, for a $210,000 property, you would save $212 in the course of a year. City of Ithaca, just shy of 1,000 or 930. For a resident of the county, outside of all of these communities, the property tax would go up by about $400, a little more than $1 a day. That's what would happen with the shift. And 210 is a median home value that we had to work with. So, you know, we can do the math based on everyone's community.
And no increase in the level of service for the outlying areas.
I'm sorry?
And no increase in the level of service to the outlying areas.
So that's the interesting question here. If we didn't have municipality boundaries to deal with, so let's just take the biggest line that we have, which is Town of Ithaca, City of Ithaca. So this kind of not quite donut, the donut with one bite taken out of it, where the Town of Ithaca is. And we didn't have to worry about that municipal boundary, we could provide law enforcement services more efficiently than we do today. If you set up your patrol zones more effectively and efficiently, dealing without your municipal borders,
But
it would.
half the population in the county is not within this dense area. It's in the rural communities. And so the rural property owners would be getting $400 a year additional taxes and what level of increased service to the rural communities.
So when the officers that are stationed in the village of Dryden, instead of stopping at the village border, would continue out to be the nearest officer to that call for all calls, not just the higher priority calls. And the same in Groton Trumansburg for Ulysses. So we begin to,
And what happens to Caroline, Newfield, Enfield, Lansing, the towns that don't have a village police office right now? Yeah.
all I can tell you is this is theoretical, and this is, if there's a serious conversation that we want to have about this, we can map out what patrol zones end up looking like, so you're able to do this a little bit more efficiently. All right, and we're going to go questions one and.
I just need to clarify, so if I'm in the city, I'll pay $395 more in county, but that'll be
No.
more than offset by,
You'll actually,
that's my net.
this is your net,
Oh, that's good.
so this is the net.
Isn't the county
Yeah,
going, I'm sorry, Satalia?
Yes.
So the argument here would be, hey, people in the county, you guys haven't necessarily been getting the quality of service that you want, everybody else has been getting adequate service. We're going to increase the quality of the service in areas where there currently isn't adequate service, and we're going to maintain the quality of service in places where there are, and then we're going to redistribute the costs. Is that generally what you're saying here?
That's generally what I'm saying could happen, yes.
So the only concern I have, which I get that argument, valid, totally. The problem with it is that the poorest people in the county are the rural, by percentage, because they can't afford to live in the urban centers.
Yes.
So basically, this is a regressive tax. We're shifting the cost onto the poorest people.
I understand your hypothesis. I haven't looked at the data to argue for or against it.
Okay, might be worth looking at just the
Yep.
Well, that's
property
because-
value distribution.
Sure.
And I may be wrong, maybe it's equal, but that's my understanding right now.
Okay.
That might just be worth looking at, because the premise and the logic is good, I totally get that. I mean, especially if you're saying the amount of time it takes to get to places that are further away currently is not good, and that's something that we need to address. It's just how we do it and distribute it would make or break how it's sold.
Absolutely. And these are initial concepts here. There's a lot of room for discussion and refinement to decide whether or not it's a path you really want to go down.
Isn't the county going to get reimbursement from all the others? Why shouldn't they?
So, if they're getting a higher level of service, there's an argument that the villages should pay a little into that. And how do they pay a little into that? One concept would be what I talked about before, which is the county holding back some of their sales tax. So that happens with the city right now, is the county holds back $180,000 of sales tax just to fund the 911 center. It's part of an agreement between the county and the city. That when they picked up the city and dedicated some staff to that, they said, all right, we'll do that, but we're going to hold back the sales tax. So we have some precedents for that in the county. I'm stating that correctly, right, Joe? Okay. So that, tipping my to the next slide a little bit, sales tax could be rebalanced to limit impact. And our other question is, could the size of the force might be reduced through better operational deployment, better, when we look at it, do we need as many chiefs that we have? Right now we have 4 chiefs and an officer in charge for these 5 departments. Would we need all that? Well, one's a sheriff, but you get my point of the chief officer. Would we need all that, or to be able to reduce that table of organization? We still would need to have some supervisory officers, but maybe they'd be at a lower pay rate. Maybe we don't need quite as many. If we're able to reduce the full-time equivalency, we're being able to bring that price down. So right now, if we paid every officer at the current IPD rate, it would be $19.2 million to have 125 officers. The current rate is $17.9 million. But if we're able to reduce down to 115 officers over time, we're able to get down to that same price point that we're paying today at the current IPD rate. The question is, what would happen with the contract? Would we level up? Would there be some negotiation there? This gets really far down the pathway. We just want to kind of set the boundary here and say, is this even worth taking a further look and begin to decide, do we want to pursue this? Are the benefits worth what the changes would be and the pain that there might be to go through the change. At the end, would we have a better system, better service for same cost? That would be our minimal goal, is better service for same cost. And maybe we'd be able to bring the cost down. So now kind of our last set of opinion questions. If you receive the same or better service from law enforcement at similar costs, would you be supportive of moving to a single agency? I understand those are big ifs. Yes, no, or I don't know. Changes. All right, move on to the next one. This is a free text one. What are your biggest concerns about moving to a single agency? Or, oh, this should have been changed. So what is your biggest concern about moving to a single agency? We didn't tweak that. That's all right. So I know it says contracting, but we really want to know, because we're talking about moving to that single agency.
Maybe I would like to, well, I would just like to say that out. My biggest concern, I wanted to bring it up, is that it be harder to control excesses in the police department. Right now in Ithaca, como council, the mayor representatives, well, if you have a big agency, the possibility of excesses by the police, and also, even though not that likely in this country of the police state, is higher.
Are you, when you say excesses, fiscal, or their interaction with the community being
Abuses
inappropriate?
of power.
Abuses of power, okay.
Mistreatment of the residents.
So, and this becomes, the question right now, so Ithaca has, and I'm not sure of the title, but it's something along the lines of a civilian review board. I forget their exact title, but that's the role that they have, where they hear and handle some of those complaints. So, that's something, as you're designing this new system, you have that clean slate.
Yeah.
And you can say, this is what we want to have, so that when there's an allegation of use of force or inappropriate behavior, people have a place to go, an ombudsman that they could talk to, or someone that's providing review of law enforcement service. But it's important to acknowledge that's a concern.
I think it will be a lot harder.
It might be a little bit easier. You have the bigger scale, and you might be able to then have the funds to put aside to dedicate a person to help hear those complaints and receive them. Whereas right now it's all handled kind of part-time or ad hoc.
Well, I don't think it's so much the ombudsman who I think it's the elected officials and the city government that has such role. The police board, of course, is important, but
And there will always be a role for elected officials, whether through legislature or potentially the direct election of the chief law enforcement officer. As union resistance, I'm not sure I would call it resistance, but you know, you're definitely the involvement of the bargaining agencies are going to impact whatever implementation occurs. So that's the important players at the table. We can meet with several of the heads of the bargaining agency, bargaining organizations as part of this process to learn a little bit about their concerns. Slide to the last one. Last question. If you had to choose between a small increase in taxes to burgers to improve services, or B, reducing taxes to trim services, which would you choose? I'm trying to force you into one camp or the other. I'm not giving you a neutral option. Getting a little bit of a sense of the audience. And we always have our 2% or whatever tax cap there is. We end up working inside that.
2%.
The property tax cap in New York State of, in theory, 2%, but it always has been less than that since it's been implemented. But you have certain things that aren't counted in it, so that gets a little wonky.
Are these questions that you asked in your survey?
No, these are questions for our public meetings, because in our survey they didn't have the options in front of them.
Do you have plans to do this like in some of the more rural town halls?
So we have 3 town halls. We have this one, we have another one being done at the Dryden, the TC3,
So just these 3?
and then one being done at Horses.
Or TC3 buses, right?
Yep.
But not in like Groton or?
Nope.
I'm not in communities that don't have village police.
So, you know, that was the interesting, you know, this is work that I love to do. And I would be happy to go meet with every community organization and go through this. However, we have a scope of time and money. So we have to be able to hit as impactfully as we can and realize that we're going to also involve elected officials, and that's where the more rural communities will be able to get their voices through their elected officials.
How are you going to be involving the rural community elections?
So we have ultimately, I'll be doing a presentation to the county legislature, I believe, or the public safety committee of the legislature.
So that's not the town boards?
That's not the town boards, no. I guess if we can discuss ways to try and engage them. You know, we did publicize these meetings. We didn't say, you know, I know we could only do 3 of them within our scope, so we tried to be a couple central and 1 nearer to a couple of the agencies that were involved in the study. You're right, there are some gaps in this process.
Going back to the paper surveys, could you tell us again where did you put those? I don't know if I never saw
Yeah.
them or if I wasn't interested. I don't remember.
They were done in March. This is when we started. They were open through all of April and into May, if I remember. We publicized them through several community-wide press releases. We did notifications to all county legislators and asked them to share with their home communities so they could be shared. I know for the villages that were involved in the process, where their police agencies were a part of it, it went out on village newsletters or a website, or was announced at a town meeting or village meeting, things along those lines. I know there was media coverage. There was an article, I think, in the Ithaca Times on it. trying to remember where all of it was, but we did our best to share it.
So for example, in Ithaca City, you didn't go to the different community centers or?
So there were paper surveys available at City Hall and at a couple of other locations in the city. And I know in the village offices of the villages that have police departments involved. But I can't, again, I'm going off of memory from several months ago, the different places we tried to hit.
We can, I mean, I know that you're working on a limited budget, so I appreciate that very much. And there's potentially a way that we could live stream one of them or get some video that's of a quality that we can share it. So some of us can look into that as well.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to our last slide of the evening. Only 15 minutes past my goal, not too bad. So our next steps in this process, we have our public input meetings to gather opinions, to share information. So tonight is our first of 3, all of them are occurring this week. And then we share the information with the study committee that we've been working with throughout, and elected leaders. So that's, it all gets pulled into one report document. Elected leaders will present it with a final report, which will include the baseline, the options, and the feedback from the community meetings. We're tentatively planning on making a presentation of those to the 2 communities that are paying for this, which is City Council, the Common Council, and the County Legislature, or whatever they designate inside those organizations. Any ultimate action will require formal planning and allow for community input. Tonight is just one step along what could be a very long journey, but this is where we're beginning to lay out some of the options for the community to consider. All project documents, including the presentation we're doing tonight, there's a 20 or so page options report that goes into a little bit more detail, and already on the website is the baseline report, is at this website, www.cgr.org/Tompkins, LESS. There's also email study team, or there's a send an email which populates into my inbox. So if you have a question or a comment that you didn't share tonight, you can go to the website and hit a little button there, and it'll populate, and you can send me an email. Thank you for coming. We appreciate all the comments, and that's the end of my formal presentation. I'm happy to take other questions or comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.